from the Mercy One studio.
Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. It's time to hear from the top Christian litigators in the nation who have come forward to tell us the truth and help us defend our faith.
Hear ye, hear ye. All rise. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano, is in session.
And good Thursday morning from the Mercy One studios in West Des Moines. I'm here in the studio with Gina No. How are you, Gina?
I'm well today. It's a beautiful day in Iowa
for
January.
For January, yeah.
But I understand we're supposed to take it and enjoy it because the blizzard's going to fly soon.
It's going to get
weekend,
cold.
maybe.
I got to make sure my snowblower is filled up with gas and ready to go.
That's
plugged in and all that.
So the legislature's in session, so we're making some laws in Iowa.
Right. So hide. The legislature's in session, yeah.
So let's pray for them,
all
for
right.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in the news, and we have a new president officially. No more president-elect.
Right.
Big week here.
Right, big week. We can probably have a lot of things to say about the new president already, but we'll let that go for now.
Right. We'll make sure that we'll follow him closely.
We will. Yes, we will. And all the things that, like we talked last week about the Equality Act and what may be coming that way, which, should scare the heck out of us.
Very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because all week I've been thinking about that Equality Act and how it's a blanket cancel of everything and everyone, and the local control we have. We can't even look at our local elected officials to save us from it.
Right, and Robert Marshall,
bill.
who was on, Bob Marshall, I talked to him last night, and he's preparing some materials to put up online that will help people sort through some of this stuff.
Well, they need to understand the definition of the equality, because it sounds so helpful.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Who's not in favor of
equality?
Sure,
right.
Yeah. And so we'll get those materials as soon as those materials are available. He'll let me know, and we'll let our listeners know where people can get that, because it's something that we need to start talking about, because it's broad. It paints the church with such a broad brush. Lose tax-exempt status if we don't have same-sex marriages or female clergy. That's another thing that's in there. Yeah.
All kinds of things.
All kinds of things.
It kind of reminds me of the ERA amendment way back in the 80s.
Phyllis Schlafly.
Right. It sounds like a wonderful thing for women and for society, and yet had it been enacted, it would have affected so many of our freedoms.
They say never judge a book by its cover. Well, never judge a bill by the title that they give it. Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
So what do we have today?
Well, we're going to talk about with John Bursch about this this law in California that requires nonprofits there to provide the Attorney General with their list of donors, which, of course, is problematic for some nonprofits. With cancel culture running wild these days, it makes those people targets. And we'll talk to him. This has been percolating around for a couple of years. About a year ago, one of my columns in The Wanderer was about this topic. And so John is going to be here, and he's going to discuss this. And it's going to be an eye-opener. And you're going to see how people kind of slide in the back door to be able to dox conservatives and Christians. And
exactly. And I'm very interested in this discussion because it's so different than the way we handle things in Iowa. So, and I was always under the impression that nonprofits were under the jurisdiction of the federal government and the IRS. So this is very
there are certain reporting requirements that the state requires, and that's where this conflict comes.
Right, and they're challenging it in the courts.
Right, and the circuits courts are split on it, something like 7-2 or 6-2 or something like that. So I think they probably have a pretty good chance in the Supreme Court, at least getting it heard, and getting a ruling that unifies everything. But I think this Supreme Court probably will help them out a bit. Then we're going to talk to Douglas Blair. Now, if you remember, we were going to have him on last week.
Right.
I screwed that up. No. I put the wrong dates down for everything.
It's okay. He was kind enough to come today.
Yeah, I talked to Doug the other day. He said, he says, I was really looking forward to that, too. We didn't get on. So he's going to be back, and we're going to talk about different ways that that kids are targeted.
Right.
For indoctrination.
Cartoons.
And by the use of cartoons.
Yes.
And I want to talk to them about other children's programming, too.
Yes.
The other thing that came up the other day that I thought I'd bring to everybody's attention, and we may get a little bit more on this in one of our upcoming programs. In North Dakota, there is a bill in the legislature to remove the ministerial exceptions to the mandatory reporting laws, which means that if a priest who hears in confession something about child abuse, if he does not break the seal of the confession and report that, he can face 30 days in jail and a $1,500 fine. So that's another attack on the church here.
And I don't understand that. I thought the courts had decided this and decided it, but we're going to try it again, I guess.
They're going to bring these cases all over. All right, do you have a prayer to open us up with, Gina?
I do. A prayer for peace this morning. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. God of peace, bring your peace to our violent world, peace in the hearts of all men and women, and peace among the nations of this earth. Turn to your way of love those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred. Strengthen us in hope and give us the wisdom and courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among the nations and in the hearts of all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Gina. Appreciate that. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, and Gina and I will be back in a few minutes right after these messages.
Thank you, Blessment International, for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Everyone lives their life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. How we use that time directly affects if our life will leave a significant impact or not. Each year, Blessment International leads Central Iowans on a 12-day, all-inclusive experience sharing the heart of Christ with children in South Africa. Teams are forming to do something significant in an African child's life. Learn more at blessementinternational.org. That's blessementinternational.org.
Is it time for a new roof? Then it could be time for you to get to know Bell Construction. Bell Construction is a roofing company entering its 30th year of business. They specialize in residential re-roofs, like commercial jobs, and have the experience to meet all of your roofing needs with personal service. With Bell Construction, the owner will come to your home or place of business in person to inspect and ensure the quality of work that you deserve. They pride themselves in working with you on a personal basis and making sure you are satisfied. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494.
Thank you, Big Red Q Quick Print, for underwriting the sports report. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. Forms, manuals, brochures, letterhead, envelopes, business cards, custom invitations, design, and bindery. Big Red Q Quick Print, located across from Merle Hay Mall. Online at bigredq-desmoines.com. Big Red Q Quick Print. We make printing easy.
What is the best gift ever? Giving a Catholic education is at the top of my list. Your contribution to CTO helps families send their children to our Catholic schools who otherwise could not afford it. In giving to CTO, you receive the best tax credits ever. Pledge or donate online at ctoiowa.org. The bottom line, it's for the kids and their future.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Dowling Catholic Sports is provided in part by Ashworth Vision Clinic. With 2 licensed optometrists, Barbara Sheets, a Dowling graduate, and Dr. Craig Harper, the Ashworth Vision Clinic team provides complete eye exams, contact lenses, glasses, glaucoma testing, and pre- and post-operative care. Ashworth Vision Clinic is located at 60th and Ashworth in West Des Moines. 515-440-4610 or online, ashworthvision.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Faith on Trial provided by Paul Martin and Paul Mitchell, owners of Imogene Ingredients. Imogene Ingredients supply specialized feed ingredients for livestock and pet diets to improve maternal and young animal health in both conventional and organic production. And welcome back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. We have with us now John Bursch, who's from the Alliance Defending Freedom, and he is the chief of Appellate Advocacy there. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Want to talk about what's going on here with this California donor disclosure law, and maybe in kind of a thumbnail version, you can explain what the problem is with it and actually what it does.
You bet. Well, the basic proposition is that every American should be free to support causes they believe in without fear of harassment or intimidation. And this particular case comes up and reaches the Supreme Court because the state of California, specifically the Attorney General's office, requires every charitable organization in the country to disclose the confidential information regarding their top donors if they want to solicit funds in California. The problem is that California leaks those confidential records like a sieve, and they're frequently found on the Internet. And that's dangerous for donors, employees, and clients of nonprofits like our client, the Thomas More Law Center. They've faced intimidation, death threats, hate mail, boycotts, and even assassination attempts for their views promoting religious liberty and pro-life causes.
All right. Now, my understanding is that this deals with a IRS form 990, which is required to be submitted to the state, which just lists the general purposes and expenditures and income of the nonprofit. But there's a Schedule B that goes with that lists donors, and that Schedule B has never been required before, but when Kamala Harris, now Vice President, was Attorney General, she's the one that started requiring that. So I guess my question is, what is the legal grounds that the Attorney General has to ask for the donors, since they have been accepting just the plain 990 form originally?
You've hit the nail right on the head. California accepted just the generic 990 for years, and then all of a sudden they changed position starting with the 2010 tax year. They started sending out notices in 2012 or so. And like I said, they leak documents like a sieve, and that's dangerous for charitable organizations' donors if they engage in conduct or litigation or advocacy that some might not like. And there's no good reason for doing it. Unlike the IRS, which needs that information in order to process taxes of these charitable organizations, the California Attorney General's office didn't have any need for this information. It never launches or ends investigations with Schedule B. If it actually needs a specific nonprofit Schedule B information, it can obtain that through a subpoena or an audit. And so what it does is it violates the free association rights of the organization and its donors, something that courts have protected going all the way back to the NAACP cases that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court when they protected NAACP membership lists from being disclosed to government officials who would then use those to expose members and potentially subject them to harassment or even lynching.
And so that's a good case for precedence in this instance.
Yes, absolutely. We're basically asking the U.S. Supreme Court to take the NAACP precedents and update them for the 21st century and apply them to these donor disclosure rules.
Now, I take it in our case here that we're talking about now, cert's been granted. Is that correct?
That's correct. The cert petition that we filed on behalf of Thomas More Law Center has been granted, as well as for another case which has been consolidated with it. And the court will hear those two cases together, most likely in April.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry, Gina, but it's my understanding that what had happened was in the original case with Thomas More that you won in the district court level, and that was reversed then in the Ninth Circuit, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and it's important about that order of events because in the district court, there was actually a trial where the judge presided as finder of fact. And after reviewing all the evidence, he concluded that, number one, California had no need for this information. Number two, California routinely allowed it, whether it was intentional or not, to be leaked so that other people could access it. And three, that leakage was dangerous for donors, employees, and clients of the Thomas More Law Center and would have the effect of discouraging donors from giving to them in the future. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just kind of wiped away all those fact findings and said that California could do whatever it wanted. And what it did, rather than applying the NAACP rule, it applied a much less stringent rule about requiring disclosure from organizations about their donors that applies only in the political context when you're talking about candidates for office and PACs that support them. We have a much more liberal tradition of making sure that Americans know who is being supported or who is supporting a particular candidate for political office. But the Supreme Court has never applied that rule to non-political events like this. That's why NAACP should apply.
Now, Citizens United, rather controversial case, upheld the donor disclosure part of that, didn't it?
It did, again, in the context of supporting political candidates for office. And the district court judge and the judges on the Ninth Circuit who dissented from a denial of a rehearing by the entire court made that point specifically, that Citizens United did not upset the NAACP line of cases. It does not conflict with it, that when you're talking about donors to charitable organizations as opposed to donors who support political candidates, the rules are very different for obvious reasons.
All right. Now, I also see in my notes here that there were 6, I guess there's a total of 8 circuits now that have ruled on this, and 6 have ruled what would be in your favor, and only 2, the Ninth Circuit and one other, have ruled the other way.
That's correct, and it's significant that the other circuit that went the other way, that lowered the standard and allowed the government to obtain more confidential information, was the Second Circuit, looking at a very similar donor disclosure policy in New York. So now we have California and New York, 2 largest states, both in jurisdictions where courts will allow government officials to demand your confidential donation information, whereas in virtually every other circuit, the exact opposite is true.
Thomas More had indicated, I think in one of the filings or something, that it had received several instances of harassment of their donors, including a donor that was having his pizza chain boycotted because of it.
Yeah, well, your listeners may know that the Thomas More Law Center was co-founded by Tom Monahan, and he has historically been a significant donor to the Law Center. He's also the founder of Ave Maria University and Law School, as well as the Legatus organization.
Right.
And because of Mr. Monahan's very strong pro-life record, pro-choice advocates organized a boycott of the Domino pizza franchises that he used to own.
Well,
that's where we should get our pizza now, Gina. Go ahead. You had a question.
Right. Well, yeah. That was my question, actually. I'd take it even a step further. I am not a lawyer, but I do follow.
You work with one.
Right. I work with one. I listen, and I follow the news. And what I've learned in the news lately, in this last election cycle, is that tax returns that are leaked have a penalty implied to the individuals who had leaked such information. So the 990 is an annual tax return form filed by nonprofit organizations with the IRS. I understand that the state of California requires those to be a copy with them to the Attorney General, but are there any penalties for leaking these official documents? And is there any recourse for donors that have had this information released to the press illegally?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up, because it is true at the federal level. If someone in the IRS or otherwise were to release your confidential tax information, you would be subjected to severe financial penalties as well as potential jail time. There are all kinds of statutes that address that, including penalizing those who accept that information. Whereas in California, they don't have any of those protections in place. In fact, that was part of the problem, is that there were no consequences whatsoever when any of this information was leaked. And that happened to organizations across the political spectrum. This isn't just a conservative organization problem, because liberal organizations can be doxxed too. Doxing being the shorthand for when people find out that there's someone or an organization that has views different than their own, that they organize boycotts and social media campaigns against them and things like that. And so to this day, California still doesn't have anything remotely close to what the federal government has to ensure that this confidential donor information stays private.
I'm curious as to why when Kamala Harris required that this Schedule B, I guess, from the IRS form be included, what was her rationale to that, and why is the state still sticking with it?
Well, yeah, it's hard to know for sure. Some have speculated that she had a bone to pick with organizations that were promoting legal agendas that were different than hers. She was a very prominent supporter of Planned Parenthood, even directed donors to her political campaign, to the Planned Parenthood website to give to them. And Thomas More Law Center has a very pro-life agenda that included assisting David Daleiden and opposing abortion buffer zones outside of clinics and all kinds of things like that. The official line from the folks inside the Attorney General's office is that it's more efficient if they have the Schedule Bs. But as I mentioned, the evidence at trial showed that they had never used the Schedule B to launch or end an investigation, that they rarely used that information in any case, less than 1% of more than 540 investigations. And when they actually needed it, it was easy to ask for and to obtain from the charitable organization. So there was no need for a blanket rule that required every charitable organization in the country that solicits in California to give up this confidential information.
So before the show, Mike read to me the actual legislation, and one of my questions to him, and we weren't quite clear, the way the legislation is written, it sounds like if anyone from California provides a contribution to a nonprofit, that nonprofit is required to send this form to the California Attorney General. So would an Iowa nonprofit receiving contributions from a Californian be required to send that to California AG?
Absolutely. That's what's so outrageous about this. Thomas More Law Center is based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It doesn't have any connection to California other than the substantial number of donors who are there who send them money to Ann Arbor, Michigan. So this is something that affects charitable organizations all across the country, not just those located in California. And if you were a sizable donor, say, from the state of Texas or the state of Florida, who gave to Thomas More Law Center in Michigan, by virtue of this California rule and its California donors, your information might be required to be filed in California and could end up on the internet for anyone to see.
That's unbelievable.
You'll know about it in the middle of the night when people with bullhorns show up in front of your house and wake you and the neighbors up because you're doing the wrong thing. It sounds like it's a very dangerous rule that they have out there. What's it look like as you go to the Supreme Court? I guess a two-part question here. Is there a relief that you have right now from the Schedule B requirement while the case is pending in the Supreme Court? And how do you think, I know it's difficult to predict how judges will rule, but do you have any idea from the briefs and things that have been filed where this case may be going when the court finally gets it?
Sure. Well, starting with the position that we're in now, the district court judge, after that trial, did enter an injunction that stopped the Attorney General's office in California from demanding these documents or, otherwise suspending charitable licenses for that organization in California. When the case went up to the Ninth Circuit and they reversed, California did agree to essentially not require the documents until the case had reached its conclusion in the U.S. Supreme Court. So as of today, Thomas More Law Center and the other plaintiffs do not have to disclose their Schedule Bs. We'll have to wait for a result. So that's a very good thing. It's always difficult to prognosticate how the U.S. Supreme Court justices will rule in any case, especially when the precedent that you're relying on is 60 years old. And so we don't have any data points from the current justices as to what they might think about that. But, it really does seem like a common sense proposition that Americans should be free to support causes they believe in without fear of harassment or intimidation. And as I mentioned, that's a principle that applies whether you're giving to an organization on the left, on the right, or in the middle of the political spectrum. The justices as a whole have been very protective of First Amendment speech rights, and we think those will come into play here. But in addition, if the freedom of association right in the First Amendment means anything, it has to mean that the court should stop governments from exposing supporters' support and contribution to an organization that may result in them being doxxed.
As we're running out of time here, John, let me ask you if you can give our listeners a website or something where people can follow what you are doing. And as I like to mention with a lot of our guests, you are yourself a nonprofit and provide a lot of legal services to churches and Christian organizations. And so there might be a place, I'm sure, on your website where there's a donate button or something that people with some spare change might want to send your way.
We appreciate that. Alliance Defending Freedom is the largest nonprofit public interest law firm in the world, protecting religious liberty, defending free speech, and protecting life at all of its stages. And so this is one of many cases that we have across the spectrum and indeed around the world in many countries. You can follow along about this case and hear about our other work at www.adflegal.org. And we would welcome support and especially prayers as we go into this U.S. Supreme Court argument in April.
Very good. And we'll keep in touch with you and see how this goes. Thank you very much for joining us, John Bursch, the Alliance Defending Freedom Vice President of Appellate Advocacy, I think is the proper title, something like that. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, and Gina and I will be back right after these messages.
Thank you, Big Red Q Quick Print, for underwriting the sports report. Family owned and operated since 1980, Big Red Q Quick Print is a full-service print shop ready to help you with all your printing needs with speed and accuracy. Forms, manuals, brochures, letterhead, envelopes, business cards, custom invitations, design, and bindery. Big Red Q Quick Print, located across from Merle Hay Mall. Online at bigredq-desmoines.com. Big Red Q Quick Print. We make printing easy.
What is the best gift ever? Giving a Catholic education is at the top of my list. Your contribution to CTO helps families send their children to our Catholic schools who otherwise could not afford it. In giving to CTO, you receive the best tax credits ever. Pledge or donate online at ctoiowa.org. The bottom line, it's for the kids and their future.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Catholic Women Now provided in part by Permar Security, providing security solutions for homes and businesses since 1953. Permar Security is a Catholic-owned family business supplying security systems, access control systems, video surveillance, fire alarm systems, and video doorbells. All alarm systems are monitored out of their monitoring center located in the state of Iowa. Permar Security, 515-244-5660, permarsecurity.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Dowling Catholic Sports is provided in part by Ashworth Vision Clinic. With 2 licensed optometrists, Barbara Sheets, a Dowling graduate, and Dr. Craig Harper, the Ashworth Vision Clinic team provides complete eye exams, contact lenses, glasses, glaucoma testing, and pre- and post-operative care. Ashworth Vision Clinic is located at 60th and Ashworth in West Des Moines. 515-440-4610 or online, ashworthvision.com.
Thank you, Dental Associates, for underwriting Dowling Catholic Sports 365. With over 40 years' experience, Dental Associates is a group dental practice with the mission of promoting optimum health and well-being to all patients, providing preventative, restorative, and cosmetic dentistry for the entire family. Message underwritten by Dr. Kenton Gleichman, Dr. Steve Karbaka, and Dr. Ben Nagel. Dental Associates, addressing your smile, needs, and dreams. Online at DesMoines-DentalAssociates.com.
Here's your forecast on Iowa Catholic Radio. It should be sunny today and fairly mild. Our afternoon high topping out at about 40, and the wind will be a little bit gusty. Overnight, we're expecting a few clouds and down to 14, and then a lot colder tomorrow following a cold front. Our afternoon high only around 25 and mostly sunny. The weather is brought to you by Divine Treasures, a Catholic book and gift store serving the Des Moines community for over 25 years. I'm meteorologist Steve Hamilton on Iowa Catholic Radio.
And you're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And with us right now is Douglas Blair, the Heritage Foundation. He's written numerous articles for the Daily Signal about indoctrination of children. And I want to talk to him about a couple of those right now. Doug, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fantastic, Mike. How are you doing?
Fine. I'm happy to finally get you on. We wanted to have you on, or we thought we were having you on last week, but that was my fault. I had misinterpreted the calendar.
Oh, that is okay. These things totally happen. I get it.
And they always come to light when you're on the air live, too. So
isn't that always how it goes?
That is.
So if your ears were ringing last week, we were thinking
yeah,
about
we were
you.
thinking about you. We were thinking about
Oh,
you.
that's what that was.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some of these methods of indoctrinating children. And the one that caught my attention, first off, was the one using cartoons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, so you're definitely keying in on something really important. And I think we can all agree that it's a parent's right to teach their child the values that they want and values that they don't. So parents should be given the choice to raise their child with traditional Christian and American values if that's what they want to do. But what used to be easy, where you could sort of trust that what your child was watching on TV or what they were learning in the classroom was going to affirm those values, was going to affirm traditional American values, that's surely not the case anymore. So I wrote this article about the cartoons because what we're finding nowadays is that programming is kind of explicitly designed to teach children about concepts or to teach children anti-American or unscientific values. So I wrote this piece about the cartoons because it's a really growing issue, and it's very disturbing.
All right, you mentioned, I guess it was the Cartoon Network.
Yes. Cartoon Network has been specifically one of the ones that's been one of these networks that has been producing content that is quote-unquote woke. So I talked about a couple of different things in my article. One of the shows that they are really pushing nowadays is a show called Steven Universe. So Steven Universe focuses on a young boy named Steven, and he goes along with his friends who are these aliens that can combine with each other and can, do these different things. And it's received a lot of praise from lots of different LGBT gay rights organizations that have sort of praised it as being this progressive cartoon. So Them Magazine, which is a very strongly focused magazine on LGBT and gay issues, says, quote, "It stands as the most progressive cartoon on TV in terms of queer representation. Steven is surrounded entirely by female superheroes and often mirrors their feminine behavior. One of them is a fusion between two female characters who are in love, and one of them used to be in love with his mother. The show features women in tuxedos, boys in dresses, and a non-binary person in whatever clothing they want, and all of it is celebrated." So we've gotten to the point now where these shows are really pushing this messaging, where it's not a part of the background anymore. It's not part of, it's incidental. We've gotten to the point where the main thrust of the show is, a boy can be a girl and a girl can be a boy, and that's not really affirming these traditional American and Christian values.
I can understand why people putting out cartoons would want to make them inclusive. And I've noticed over the years there's a growing number of cartoon figures that are people of color. And it's one of those things where they're there just like other people would be in your life, but they're not pushing a particular agenda. They're not making a big fuss out of the thing. It sounds
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds to me like what these people are doing is they're pushing the issue.
Yeah. So one of the things that's so different about this versus, for example, like a Pokemon show, a show that I used to watch when I was a kid, is that there was messaging.
You're
in
dating
those shows.
yourself now.
Yes, Pokemon was on when I was a kid, so I have very fond memories of watching Pokemon when I was a kid. And
I can date myself. Howdy doody.
Oh my goodness!
Have
yeah.
a cartoon, Mike. You need to.
I need to woke up, right?
That's right.
Right, there you go. Get with the times. So yeah, when I was a kid, I used to watch Pokemon, and Pokemon wasn't this kind of like boring, no messaging, kind of like garbage cartoon. There was messaging in it that was very positive. I remember very clearly there was an episode where the main character had to say goodbye to one of his Pokemon, and it was, I was a child, and as a 6-year-old, this was the saddest thing I'd ever seen in my life. But it was a very important lesson. Sometimes you need to say goodbye to the people you care about, and that's kind of a universal truth, right? One of these things that you can look at and say, all children should learn this. That's a really far cry from what we're seeing nowadays with things like Steven Universe, where the main messaging in the show is, non-binariness is normal, and you can be a girl if you're a boy. You can be a boy if you're a girl. It's the messaging is now front and center as opposed to sort of moral or something like that.
You mentioned in your article about a particular ad that the cartoon, I guess, network is running having to do with Thomas Edison.
Yeah, so this ad is broadcast on the show, on the channel itself. So this is something that kids who are watching TV will be seeing. It focuses on something called anti-racism, which anti-racism on the tin sounds like something very positive. Like, who's not anti-racist? But it's a little bit more insidious than that. I know you've had my colleague Mike Gonzalez on the show, and he's talked a little bit about anti-racism as well, where it's this idea that, if you don't support these very leftist sort of socialistic policies in terms of race, you're still a racist. So anti-racism is not exactly what it seems. So back to the ad. The ad basically says, Thomas Edison was not the person who invented the light bulb. That's just whitewashed history. Instead, the credit should go to a black inventor named Lewis Latimer. Now, Lewis Latimer was definitely a very smart man. He was an African American who he basically improved the filament in the light bulb. But that's kind of a far cry from saying he invented it. CNN, which is no right-wing network, even acknowledged this is not the case, that Lewis Latimer did not invent the light bulb. It was still Thomas Edison. But this ad basically, in the cause of anti-racism and wokeness, has basically decided to reframe history, or in an attempt to sort of kind of change history to make it more convenient, has decided that Thomas Edison is problematic, and now we can't cite him for having created the light bulb.
How many other children's programs are infected with this? Not just cartoons, but other children's programming.
I mean, this is something that's become kind of widespread. I think cartoons are where it's most visible, though. A lot of children's programming on, say, Netflix is also, though, kind of infected with this sort of wokeness and, kind of anti-American, anti-Christian values. So I recall speaking with a friend of mine about the new Babysitter's Club remake on Netflix, and there's a character that she's in the hospital, and she is talking to a doctor, and the doctor continually refers to her as a girl, and she goes, "Well, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy." And this is sort of treated as this defining moment of this character's arc, that this little girl is not a little girl, this little girl is a boy. And the doctor was wrong, and the doctor was immoral for referring to this child, this character, as a girl, even though that's what they are. I would say it's becoming more and more apparent, and the problem here is that unless people start to stand up to it and people start to look for media that teaches positive American values, then this will continue. It's not going to go away.
So there was a time when I think parents could feel safe setting their kids down in front of the TV for a while they went and did the wash or the dishes or whatever. But now you can't do that. You kind of have to monitor these things yourselves.
Absolutely. It's definitely become something that parents need to monitor. Like I said before, when I was a kid growing up, my parents could trust that when I was watching TV, it wouldn't be something subversive. It wouldn't be something that was going to go against what they were teaching me. It would be something that I would be learning positive values. So again, I'll go back to Pokemon. Nobody's going to argue with the messaging that it's hard to say goodbye to people, but it's necessary, or that, you shouldn't give up on your dreams, you should pursue them. I find it quite disturbing, though, that it's got to the point now where a parent needs to be actively watching with their child, sort of to recognize if something's like, oh, I don't want my kid watching that. That's not something I want my child to be learning.
Well, and cartoons have traditionally been a developmental tool for children to understand concepts that are difficult to use words to explain, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
They've hooked on to something by slipping these messages into cartoons, because that's a good place for children to pick up on what behaviors they need to be aware of. I noticed that Disney last August, I think, released their first LGBTQ plus cartoon, and it was interesting. Until I saw the story on it, it didn't dawn on me that these cartoons are created by artists, absolutely brilliant artists. They have such talent. but that community of artists obviously has a higher percentage, I would guess, of that community, LGBTQ. So it makes sense, right, that they'd like to see their community more represented in their work. But I noticed the interview with the Disney creator. She said that of this new cartoon called The Owl House, that it took her a long time to get Disney leadership to become open to the idea of her adding characters that were gay in her cartoon product. And they finally did in August, I guess. It's out now, called The Owl House. So I think it's a dangerous trend that we're going to see more and more of in cartoons, as you've already pointed out. I do want to say that there are Catholic productions or Christian productions of cartoons that are really, the quality has really increased. And I'd encourage our listeners and parents to look for those. One of my favorites is Formed. You can, I think that's the Augustine Institute releases.
Maybe,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a what am I trying to say? A subscription service. But they also have some really good cartoons because our children do need cartoons. I would say that taking those away from our children is not the right direction to go.
Right.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Doug.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like, I'm going to date myself again very quickly. VeggieTales was another show that, like, I didn't watch it, a lot, but it was something that was out there, and it was, something that, you had that option of doing, and that was, you could watch that show. I think that there is that entertainment that exists, just you need to actively search it out now.
You wrote another article about called "I'm a Former Teacher. Here's How Your Children Are Getting Indoctrinated by Leftist Ideology." And you mentioned a couple of stories in here that I thought were kind of interesting. One was involved Winston Churchill, of all people.
Yeah. So Winston Churchill, I think everybody here and all of our listeners can agree that he was a great man. He wasn't perfect, but, I mean, who is? There's really no man on earth that we can point to as saying, well, this man is without sin, this man is flawless, this man is perfect. But Winston Churchill, obviously was one of the key figures in the Second World War. He managed to protect the West from the Nazis and, the invasion of Britain. But he's quickly becoming a character that is getting canceled. So the story you're referring to, I was teaching a student of mine, and they had asked me for some help with a project that they were doing that had been assigned at their other school. So I worked in an after-school program as well. So they asked me, like, who are some famous Brits? Who are some famous English people? And I gave the sort of very obvious answers, William Shakespeare, Princess Diana, Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria. And then I also gave Winston Churchill. And she immediately, without a pause, turns to me and says, no, not him. He's racist, and he didn't think that women should have rights, so he was a bad guy. And it was kind of just like, this clearly wasn't something that she had come up with on her own. She hadn't just, like, reflected on it. She was a 10-year-old. She hadn't reflected on this and said, like, oh, like the time period and all of that stuff. No, she had been taught, somebody had actively taught her that Winston Churchill was a bad person and that he deserved to be kind of thrown into the dustbin of history, right? That this was a person that we should kind of ignore. And I am as somebody who has worked in education, I am 100% a proponent of educating people on the intricacies of human beings. I think that, Winston Churchill is a great man, but he wasn't perfect. And to sort of idolize him and lionize him as this perfect being is not helpful either. But it's I would say worse to sort of say, well, we're not going to acknowledge him at all because he was a, he had these values that don't click with my 21st century. That nobody would be eligible for praise, or nobody would be kind of held up as an icon if we were going to apply 21st century values back to people who were born in the 19th or 18th centuries.
Mm-hmm. And your glitch you found was story time.
Yes. So I would usually tell stories to my children, and I find that stories, in the same way that cartoons are a really good way to tell morals. So I would tell stories from all over the world, right? I wouldn't just, focus on America. I would tell stories from the Revolution, of course, and I would try to tell stories from the Bible. That's obviously, there was an issue with that, but I would tell stories from China. I would tell stories from the Australian Aborigines. I would tell stories from, Europe, like stories of princesses and castles and all that good stuff. But all of that was fine. The issues became when I would tell stories from the Bible. So the Old Testament is obviously full of very great stories. Tower of Babel, the Great Flood, the Garden of Eden. These are great stories that teach morals about how to best live and how to be a good human being. And I think that it's interesting that, that was the one that started to cause issues. Of course, the Chinese stories would have morals as well. The Indian stories would have morals. The European stories would have morals. But it didn't become an issue until it was kind of very clear that it was the Tower of Babel, right? It was the Garden of Eden. Those were the stories that became problematic. And I was told that, story time would be next if I didn't act those types of stories. So, I mean, it's a little bit obvious where the focus was, and it was a little bit obvious where the bias leaned with the administration.
Unfortunately, Doug, we're out of time, and we have to leave it at that. But real quick, before we go, how do people get the Daily Signal online?
Yeah, so I highly, highly recommend your listeners check out the Daily Signal on our website. So if you go to dailysignal.com, you can read my pieces and some pieces by some other really great heritage staff. It's a fantastic place online to get your daily news. It's high quality. We try to report honestly and with all the facts. So we also report on some of the most important questions of the day. So if they go online to dailysignal.com, they should be able to find all of that really good stuff.
Thank you very much, Douglas Blair from the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Certainly. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, and Gina and I will be right back after these messages.
What is the best gift ever? Giving a Catholic education is at the top of my list. Your contribution to CTO helps families send their children to our Catholic schools who otherwise could not afford it. In giving to CTO, you receive the best tax credits ever. Pledge or donate online at ctoiowa.org. The bottom line, it's for the kids and their future.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Catholic Women Now provided in part by Permar Security, providing security solutions for homes and businesses since 1953. Permar Security is a Catholic-owned family business supplying security systems, access control systems, video surveillance, fire alarm systems, and video doorbells. All alarm systems are monitored out of their monitoring center located in the state of Iowa. Permar Security, 515-244-5660, permarsecurity.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Dowling Catholic Sports is provided in part by Ashworth Vision Clinic. With 2 licensed optometrists, Barbara Sheets, a Dowling graduate, and Dr. Craig Harper, the Ashworth Vision Clinic team provides complete eye exams, contact lenses, glasses, glaucoma testing, and pre- and post-operative care. Ashworth Vision Clinic is located at 60th and Ashworth in West Des Moines. 515-440-4610 or online, ashworthvision.com.
Thank you, Dental Associates, for underwriting Dowling Catholic Sports 365. With over 40 years' experience, Dental Associates is a group dental practice with the mission of promoting optimum health and well-being to all patients, providing preventative, restorative, and cosmetic dentistry for the entire family. Message underwritten by Dr. Kenton Gleichman, Dr. Steve Karbaka, and Dr. Ben Nagel. Dental Associates, addressing your smile, needs, and dreams. Online at DesMoines-DentalAssociates.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Faith on Trial provided by Paul Martin and Paul Mitchell, owners of Imogene Ingredients. Imogene Ingredients supply specialized feed ingredients for livestock and pet diets to improve maternal and young animal health in both conventional and organic production. Information about Pharmatan and other products at ImogeneIngredients.com. Paul and Paul are members of St. Augustine's Knights of Columbus and encourage their brother knights to keep standing for their faith.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Storm Alert Weather is provided by Divine Treasures. Divine Treasures is a Catholic book and gift store serving the Des Moines community for over 25 years. Their mission is to help Catholics know, love, and keep their faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and His Church. Divine Treasures is where you can find great Catholic books, beautiful Bibles, rosaries, jewelry, statues, and religious gifts for those memorable events in your life. Divine Treasures, 5701 Hickman Road, Des Moines, 515-255-5230. Thank you to Divine Treasures for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. Interesting, very interesting show today.
We always have very interesting shows, but today I really enjoyed our conversations. Newer topics.
Mm-hmm.
Had no idea that a state could have such authority that California to invade all of our homes the way California has with their donor list requirements.
Yeah, they've invaded our homes in other ways too, because they're so big that in some places, for example, emission rules for cars. If California adopts a certain standard that's higher than the national standard, ultimately, because so many cars are sold in California, that will become the standard.
Unbelievable that they have that much power over all of us.
Well, and they had the problem in I guess it was in Texas a few years ago with textbooks the same way. Texas State Board of Education required certain textbooks to be used, and if you didn't meet their requirements, you wouldn't be able to get into Texas. Well, Texas was such a big consumer of textbooks that it just turned, and most of the other states started adopting these things too, because that's what was being published.
Well, and I think some of our donors need to know also that when they make significant contributions to an organization that also accepts gifts from Californians, their level of contribution to that organization may become public.
Right, and I think instead of rather than scaring off a lot of small donors, I think there was a level. Yes. Of contribution that had to be achieved before they had to supply that. Now, that doesn't mean that if they lose, if Thomas More loses this case with the Alliance Defending Freedom, that California might go back and say, okay, now every donation has to count in this. But right now, I think and I forget what the threshold amount was, but there was an amount.
Pretty significant, I think.
Yeah.
And
all of our donors. Significant donors.
All my contributions?
Yes.
No. Yeah, I don't think so. It was interesting, too, that Mr. Bursch pointed out that California is not the only state that requires this. New York has a similar...
California and New York, who'd guess? Yeah.
Yeah, they bring us a lot of stories here at Faith on Trial, don't they?
They do, and you were mentioning something during one of the breaks that, when we first started this program, 5 years ago or whatever it was, all of these things were confined pretty much to the coast.
Well, they were great news for our program but they were happening somewhere else, and we were completely unaware of them here in the middle of the country.
And now we can see that all this stuff is migrating toward the center of the country.
Right.
And what happens, we've said this many times in the program, what happens in Massachusetts and New York and California eventually will find its way here.
Right. And, the fact that these... private things are becoming made public, whether it's intentional or an accident. As these laws creep into the middle of the country and we're all subject to them, lists of donors to religious organizations, parishes, schools, hospitals, those become public. And not that I would be embarrassed about the organizations that I support. It's the threat of harm done because your name has been.
They're boycotting your business. Trying to close you down. Yeah, it's the cancel culture is alive and well in our country, and I think this donor disclosure thing is very, very important.
And it can be dangerous.
Yes. Right. And of course, Doug, talking about the indoctrination of children, we've talked about that before on the program.
Oh, sure.
But this is kind of unique, looking at cartoons and children's programming that's doing this.
Right, and a lot of times when we talked about it before, it was a program, helped our listeners become aware of this program or that program or this network or that network. But I think what Doug has pointed out to us is that it's across the board. And again, I can't help but believe it's because of the creative artists behind, they want to see their
But who
lifestyle.
would tell a 10-year-old child that Winston Churchill was not a good guy?
Wow.
I know he was a heavy drinker. And sometimes I'd like to maybe some of our leaders ought to find out what he was drinking and get it for themselves, because he was certainly a very capable leader. And he literally kind of saved Western civilization in a way.
Well, yes. And every human being is flawed.
That's
and
right.
When are we going to, don't throw a stone unless you can have no sin. So it's our culture is changing. I think we'll get to a brink and people will pull back.
I hope so. I don't see it in the near future, but maybe we can work on that. That can be our goal here.
Through prayer.
Yeah, through prayer.
And fasting, we can support our leaders.
Speaking of prayers, we need to close with our prayer to our patron, St. Michael the Archangel. Defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you for joining us and join us next week for another edition of Faith on Trial. Until then, have a blessed and peaceful week.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano. Faith on Trial, Thursdays at 10 a.m. on Iowa Catholic Radio, iowacatholicradio.com, and the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.